I've struggled with addiction since I was 16. I've had everything and lost everything. Houses, cars, relationships. I've lost everything due to my addiction. It consumed me, took over my life. It left me spiritually broken, where I felt dead inside, where I would pray to die every day. And with the support of my family and the church, people who surrounded me with love and never gave up on me, and the power of prayer, I made it to Recovery Point, Charleston. Walked in on my own free will after 15 years of struggling with addiction. Coming here to Southridge Church is really, I'm not spiritually broken anymore. I know I can do anything now.
So I struggled with addictions, and my daughters went through addictions, but they've been different addictions. I have an addictive type personality, and I have what I call a man addiction. Always, my dad left when I was 10, and so from that point going forward, I always felt like rejected, and I felt like I needed to have a man to fill that void because my dad wasn't around when I was growing up. So I just went from relationship to relationship to relationship. I never had a period where I didn't have a man until the last 4 years. So it took a lot to get me through that, and I didn't even realize it was an addiction until, you know, I got in abusive relationships and bad relationships and relationships where I was always codependent on someone. Like I felt like I could not be whole without another person. The bigger addiction issue was my daughter in 2012, right after she graduated from high school. She got pregnant, which was one of my biggest fears. And she got messed up with a guy who was a huge addict. And she had my grandson Brody, and he was born with cystic fibrosis, which is a disease that impacts your lung and your digestive system, several things in the body. And he was in NICU, and she was young. She was so young and so immature, not ready to be a mother. And so it was like after he was born, like something happened to her. She had postpartum depression, and I had, made arrangements for her to live with me to help her because the guy dumped her when she found out she was pregnant. And then right before Brody was born, he started coming back into the picture. So that only lasted about 3 weeks. And then she ended up, we ended up fighting, and she ended up leaving and taking Brody. And I didn't realize at first what was going on. Brody was really sick. When he was 4 months old, he ended up in the hospital. He was like severely sick. She brought him to me severely sick, and I didn't realize how distressed he was. And so at the hospital, I noticed some odd behavior. They would like come and sleep the whole time, or like then they would go to the bathroom and then come out and like bouncing off the wall. And so I'd never really been around people that had been on drugs before, but I got suspicious. And so, I talked to the doctors, and so I started watching for signs, and I quickly discovered and had confirmation that they were doing drugs. I think she tried to hold it together. She told me from the first time that she used that she was immediately addicted to it. And I think she tried to hold it together while she still had Brody. I usually kept him 3 or 4 days a week, but I immediately started the process of trying to get custody of him, which was a very difficult decision for me because I was afraid of what would happen, and it did happen because it put her more and more into the addiction after she didn't have him, because I think she kind of held it together until I got custody. But after I got custody of him, she went full-fledged into it, and which led to the life that most drug addicts live. She got involved in dealing. She was in with a drug dealer from Detroit. She was dealing to fulfill her need for drugs. She was living in crime. They were stealing from people and robbing people and just doing crazy things. Her boyfriend was on fugitive files, it seemed like every other week. I went through a lot of madness. It was 3 years of horror, and it was hard for people to understand, but it got to the point where it was so bad that I couldn't even buy her clothes because she would sell them for drugs. Like anything I would buy for her, Bath and Body Works, whatever, I would see it the next day on Facebook yard sale. She would be selling it because she didn't have anything. And so finally it got to the point where I would just like take her water and peanut butter crackers because half the time she didn't have anything to eat. because it was hard. My daughter, I would go 3 and 4 weeks without hearing from her. And every time I would see something on the news that, somebody got stabbed or somebody got killed, I always wondered, was it her? And I would text her. And sometimes it was weeks before I heard from her. In the last year, she only saw her son twice. I let her come home twice. And she would come home and get her belly full and take a shower and then take off the next day. It was about a month after the last time she came home. Her boyfriend was in jail again, and she was homeless. She was living in a shed in somebody's backyard. She hadn't had anything to eat or drink. She hadn't had a shower for days, and she was in debt to the drug dealer. She owed him about $4,000, and he was looking for her. And somebody had stole her purse, allegedly, and stole the drugs, and she was desperate. And she called me crying, begging me to come home, and I said, no. You can't come home. We've done this twice. I can't do this to Brody. So it was at that point that she hit her rock bottom, because there has to be that point where they hit their rock bottom. And so I gave her the alternative to either go get a medical detox or go to the homeless shelter. I said, I'll pick you up and take you to the shelter, but you can't come to the house. After some talking and praying, she said, okay. So I took her to Thomas. She did a 5-day detox, and I immediately started trying to get her into a long-term rehab. And I didn't have the money to pay for one, and Recovery Point wasn't in Charleston at the time. And so I had a friend who told me about Liberty Place in Richmond, Kentucky, but they said that there was a month waiting period for a bed. And I was like, man, if I don't get her in quickly, she is going to keep going down that path. So I prayed. I took her to Thomas on a Sunday. Thursday night, I got the call, and they said, we have a bed. Can you bring her Friday? I said, you bet. So I drove 3 hours and dropped her off at the door. I couldn't even walk in the door with her. And she spent almost 8 months there going through the 12-step program. It was based on the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And she's been clean for almost 3 years. It was a horrible thing. And I think she's still, and what they try to do there is get to the bottom of what made you do drugs in the first place. And she has a lot of the struggles that I had when I was growing up. I think she has an emptiness and lack of self-esteem, and she's kind of a man addict too. God has prevailed, and she's clean and sober, and now we're ministering to people who are in recovery and trying to get free from it. So
yes, I have struggled with addiction, and my dad struggled with addiction. His addiction was mostly alcohol. Mine was drugs, particularly marijuana and some alcohol. I kind of tried to get away from it because I realized that I was that type of person, an addictive personality, and my wife would always remind me of that. So I started doing drugs in college. And we did various things. I'm not even sure what some of them were, to tell you the truth. But mostly we smoked pot. And of course, when I started, I didn't think anything of it. But after I graduated from college and started working, and I got married, of course, and it was like a slow downward spiral. Towards the end, I got very dark. It didn't matter if I had the marijuana or didn't have it. I was always angry about it. I wanted to quit, but I was not able to quit by myself. My work suffered. My marriage suffered. Of course, I had a buddy at work who was Christian, and he was always after me, to come to church and to participate and stuff. And there was one afternoon that I really got angry at the people at work, and he came in and he said, we need to pray. And I was like, well, yeah, I think you're right. And we prayed, and I asked the Lord for help, and he did. He helped me. He released me from that addiction, because I went home and I threw the stuff away, and found out later my wife has caught me in there throwing everything away, and she was like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm done with it. I'm through. I found out later that she was going to leave me because of it, because I'd become so angry and she just couldn't get along with me. It didn't matter when she talked to me, I was always angry and we just couldn't communicate. I didn't listen to her, that type of thing. So, meeting Jesus definitely changed things. She hung around and she could immediately tell the difference. Now we've been married, this is going on 37 years. And this would have been, 21 years ago that this happened. So I think it's addictive. You become used to not, it's a physical, mental thing. It's something, I guess, like smoking cigarettes. You're used to doing it, it's something to do. So that's kind of a physical thing. But also, I think it definitely is addictive mentally because of the way it makes you feel. It makes things that are normally black and white, issues that are black and white, it makes it all gray. It starts becoming blurred as to what's right and what's wrong. I definitely feel like it's addictive. I went to Sunday school when I was a kid, and I always believed in God. I believed in Jesus Christ, but I think our pastor, Scott Beha, pretty much said it all. I was one that, like him, I didn't want anybody telling me what to do. And, the Lord doesn't tell you what to do, but He shows you what is right and what's not right.
I have struggled with addiction for 20 years. I grew up in addiction. My mom and my dad were both addicts and alcoholics. I was a functioning addict for about 15 years, and I had a son, and the second that I picked up a needle, my life was over. I was very successful. I ended up getting charges, and I went to prison for 2.5 years. I did really well in prison, and I got out, and I was still doing very well. I lost my dad to addiction, my sister to addiction, and my boyfriend to addiction. I got out in July of 2018, and I relapsed in December of 2018, and I was on parole. I knew how far that my addiction could drag me down, and I need to be there for my son, and I need to get my life on track. So I went and I told my parole officer that I had relapsed, and she put me in recovery point in Charleston, and this is where I want to start my life over yet again.
I have certainly struggled with addiction. Thanks to God alone, the 23rd of last month, it made 8 months sober for me. Most of my friends are in active addiction still yet. I started drinking real heavy when I got out of the Army, and was in denial about it for a long time. I've always been a musician too, so the kind of people and the lifestyle that I lived as a musician has always put me around parties, and it quickly for me it just snowballed, and I just became a party person. People would only hit me up if they wanted to party, if they had some drugs, or if they were looking for some drugs, or if they just were looking for a party or something. I became that person, and it kind of just took over my personality, really. This is all hindsight that God has given me, that I can see now that I've been set free thanks to Jesus Christ and His sacrifice for me, because I tried so many times to do it myself and I never got anywhere. Spiritually, mentally, and physically, the three aspects of health that I try to take care of now. Looking back, I was completely spiritually bankrupt. I'd been an atheist for 10 years, those same years that I had been partying and doing drugs and stuff. I hated God. And also mentally and physically, though, I would skip meals to drink. I'd wake up in the morning, and if it was one of those days I was just, didn't want to think about my emotions, or just, if I just felt like making the day a complete non-starter, which was most days, I just wake up, open that pint, start drinking on it. Well, I tell you what, it brought me to some really bad places. And I mean that literally. You know, the places that I've shown up, people that partying put me around and addiction put me around, and the places that it took me to, I've seen some dark things, and like, you know, basically like trap houses and like drug dens. I mean, I've been some dark places. People that party, you know, it starts out, oh, you got a friend who drinks beers on the weekend. Then you're known as that guy who's always drinking or partying. Then you show up, you know, and then you show up at somebody's party and their house is kind of a wreck. They might hold a day job and they're considering themselves a functioning addict or whatever it may be. And then you got those other people where you show up and people are just laying around like needles sticking out of their arm, or there's drugs crushed up on the end tables. The house is dingy and dirty, and I mean, it just spirals real quick, and it's easy to find yourself getting around the wrong people and getting brought into the wrong situations. Like, the farther you go with your addiction, the more it takes over your life and brings that darkness, that evil into your life, into your lifestyle. So, really, like, everything changed. Like, I had to go to jail. I got drunk and was thinking about killing myself one night, and got super blackout drunk. Did some things that landed me in jail. I forcibly got sober. You know, I spent my first 3 days detoxing in jail, and those were the most miserable days of my life, bar none. God sent someone to preach to me in that jail. One of my cellmates was a backslidden preacher who was in there on drug charges, and when he asked me how I got there, and I told him about my story about thinking about killing myself and being super drunk, and he started preaching to me, and it hit me like a wave, and I gave my life back to God, and since then everything has been completely different. You know, I know now that there is an objective right and wrong in this world. There is a real right way and a wrong way to live your life, regardless of what you think. That I thought I was justified because of all the things that I'd been through in my childhood, or because I thought God hated me so much. You know, I felt like it was just an open door for me to use and drink and raise hell as much as I wanted to. But looking back, it was all just one huge mistake, and I was miserable. And I'll tell you what, I'm done making decisions with my life. I've given it all to God, and that's been the best decision I've ever made, because He's shown me there's a real way to live, and there's a better way to live, and I'm never looking back.
I've struggled with addiction my whole life, almost, it seems like. Like, I started early. My family has. I've seen people die. I've died myself a few times. I've hurt a lot of people. I've been hurt. Sorry. I've had so many wonderful people in my life, and I've lost a lot of wonderful people. And I'm here today to try to better myself. I'm at Recovery Point. I'm actually court ordered there. My judge saved my life. Both my prosecuting attorney and my probation officer wanted me to go to prison for 5 years. And my judge stood up for me. And now I have all kinds of new opportunities, and I am a felon, but it's okay. I'm making it, and Recovery Point in Charleston is hard. It's not easy, but it's saving my life. And it took me a minute to understand that. I fight everything. I gotta learn the hard way through everything. But it doesn't have to be that way. Anybody that's in active addiction, I pray for you. It's hard. It's so hard. And losing people is so hard.
I am a survivor of addiction. I grew up in southern West Virginia in Coal Camp in Logan County. I began my dance with addiction at the ripe old age of 10, 4th grade. Alcohol was easy enough to come by, and being it was in a coal camp, there was a lot of weed being grown and passed around. So I very quickly graduated from that to pills, and then to illicit street drugs. It wasn't so many years before I could honestly say if it was a drug in the United States, I'd done it. My life spiraled totally out of control. I found myself being in one jam right after another, even doing a little time as a result of decisions I was making. I got a job as a maintenance man at Spring Hill Apartments, and life was all about the party. I didn't know where to buy drugs, so I went out. I found someone who did. I knew if I found the prostitutes, I knew they were doing what they were doing to support their addictions. So went out and found the prostitute, said, hey, I'll buy if you'll hook us up. Anyway, turns out the dope man was 3 doors down from my apartment. I had intended on buying dope that night, and what we were doing then was crack. She made me an offer for a safe place to be able to smoke. She'd give me half her dope, and I thought, can't pass that up. Well, within a week's time, I had 5 prostitutes living with me. They would go out, do their thing, buy their dope, give me half, and life was merry. During that time, my drug of choice was opiates. I ripped off a morphine dealer. I had 100 hits of morphine. I would inject the morphine, smoke the crack, speedball, and life was really good until the drug started running out. Lost the job, was getting evicted out of my apartment, had burnt every bridge that I had, homeless, in severe withdrawal. My dad is the last person that I would ever turn to in that kind of crisis, and I don't even know how I got to him, but he lives here in Huntington. I found myself at his house. I was getting very dope sick. I can remember the trembling was getting worse and worse. I felt worse and worse. And my dad began to try to call rehabs to get me in. And he couldn't. Nobody was taking anyone without insurance. It seemed like hopeless. And my withdrawal was getting worse and worse. And I got to a place where I wanted to die. I was miserable. I can remember my dad being so distraught. He went through the house and he came back and he sat down in the chair beside of me. And I can remember seeing his pistol. And my dad, I'd never really seen cry, had tears in his eyes. And he said, son, I won't let the dope kill you. We sat there in silence, and I knew that he was really pondering taking my life so that the drugs themselves wouldn't kill me. Anyway, phone rang, and it was a secretary from one of the rehabs. Said, sir, I'm not supposed to tell you this. Have him arrested. And then the state has to deal with him. And he did. I was so far in withdrawal, I don't remember being arrested. I remember maybe 5 minutes in the jail cell. I remember maybe 5 minutes of memory in a hospital because I went into seizures. And I lost actually about 2 weeks of my life that I cannot remember. I remember waking up there, not knowing how I got there, still yet confused. I knew one thing, somewhere in the midst of all of that, I had asked Christ into my life. And I determined that this is the only way I'm going to live. I tried to pray and live right and read the Bible every day. And I have to tell you the truth, as the cobwebs cleared, the praying I was doing, the scripture I was reading, it felt pointless. I felt like I was talking to a wall. But I was determined. I was going to do this, and I was going to do it right. I'd been there a little over 30 days. Still sick. Still miserable. Still praying. I went to my counselor, and I had like 5 questions. And her reply to me was, Larry, I don't have the answers. the biggest question was, when does this get better? And she couldn't tell me. And I remember as I was walking out of her office, she said to me, "Don't give up 5 minutes before the miracle." That accomplished making me mad. It was about all that did. At that time, once a week, they would take a group of us to AA and NA meetings. And I was scheduled to go to an NA meeting that night. And I was informed I got bumped from the list. I said, I can be miserable my whole life, or I can be stoned. So I went back to my cell, and the group left, and I was just kind of stewing in my misery. A little bit later, they came back and said, "Hey, one of the people that had signed up decided not to go. So you have a seat." Well, changes nothing. I'm going to do my time here. I'm going to get out. I'm going to get high, and things will just happen however they happen. We went to the NA meeting. The first 3 people that shared that night not only answered my 5 questions, they answered them in order. Now, life wasn't always a bed of roses after that. When I was 10 years old and getting high, it was all fun with my friends. Stealing my dad's beer, or, scoring some weed somewhere, taking some pills. It was all fun and games. The fun and games didn't last long. It became a way of life. I lived my life for drugs. And I remember how miserable my life had become. I've never lost that feeling. I can sense it even today. So that has defined my life, because I was once one of the marginalized that people have a tendency to thumb their nose up at or to be judgmental with. I had determined that I was going to be the best Christian I could be, but I was also going to make myself available. AA has the saying, we keep what we have by giving it away. And that resonated with me, because I needed people giving me love and support. And as the years progressed, I had determined I was going to be the best I could be at sobriety and Christianity. But it really boils down to those 2 memories. The memory of my misery, and the memory of that first day that I knew that I was going to be okay. Don't give up 5 minutes before the miracle. That's my story.